Welcome to the PGN Podcast. With this podcast, we're looking to normalize the conversation around flooding. What happens behind the scenes, lifting the curtains on the mystery that can sometimes come into play when you're either involved with flooding or trying to protect your home. We're talking to some experts in the industry and relaying some of the experiences we heard from some communities. Hopefully, after our series, you'll have a bit more information to help yourself or help others in an emergency where flooding is involved. So, welcome to the PGN Podcast. I'm Meshi and this is Carl.
Hello.
Today we will be exploring accelerated action, what that means. The frequency of intense rainfall obviously is ramping up much more faster than we anticipated in the context of climate change, and flood management strategies need to evolve. I think it's accepted. For us today, we want to look at what that could look like in the context of the impacts of climate change. We want to look at some of the adaptive measures we can incorporate. We want to look at the language around climate change, which hopefully with our guests today, they will help us learn more on the subject, and also practices and potential mitigation against some of the risks on the horizon.
We've got two great guests with a wealth of experience in flood management. So firstly, we've got Kate Lloyd, Regional Director of the Institute of Civil Engineers for the North East Yorkshire and Humber branch, and Andy Mace, Director from ARUP. So firstly, Kate, would you like to just introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Kate Lloyd. I live in the Tyne Valley, and I came up to the Northeast to study civil engineering at university a few years ago now, 30 years ago now. And I completed my degree and then went to work on site. I did a range of things: water treatment works, sewage treatment works, road projects, bridge projects, a range of things. And then following that, I went back to the university where I did a little bit of lecturing before moving to the Construction Industry Training Board, where I started out talking about education and trying to promote careers in construction, and then moved into really specialising in equality and diversity and fairness, inclusion and respect for the construction sector. And then I left that role. I worked for Constructing Excellence in the Northeast, trying to change the way that the industry is doing things for the better and trying to get better collaboration across the industry. And then started with the Institution of Civil Engineers earlier this year.
Brilliant. Collaborative work and sort of brighter future career prospects are two things I'm really passionate about, so it's great to hear your kind of background on that. So Andy, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes, thanks very much. Andy Mace. You'll tell I'm not from the Northeast, but I moved up to the Northeast in 92, also to go to university. I did a building services degree actually at Northumbria University, which really combined my love of the environment, but also engineering and looking for solutions. But at that time, very buildings focused. After that, I then did an MSc in water resources, probably at the same time as you, Kate, actually at Newcastle University. I went back into building services for a few years in a consultancy further south, and then joined ARUP in about 2000, really because I wanted to be kind of working more at the cutting edge of sustainability in buildings, even at that time. So a few years doing that, starting to get a bit frustrated that decisions that had been made sort of further up in, let's say, in the master planning sort of process meant that as building engineers, we were being restricted really in terms of how sustainable we could make the buildings. So started to work with our master planning teams, did some really interesting work on eco-cities in China and Kazakhstan and various parts of the world, which really took me into the sort of systems, both sort of built environment systems, but natural systems thinking. Long story short is that I then moved back up to Newcastle, led ARUP's sustainability and environment team, which I was very privileged to lead for about 15 years, including our natural flood management experts. Over the last 18 months, I've changed roles slightly, and at the moment I'm wearing two hats. One, working on urban energy and the energy sort of net zero transition in the north and Scotland, but also helping to develop our energy business across India, the Middle East and Africa, which gives a whole different view of challenges.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Andy, and a great sort of three of us here, alumni from Newcastle University as well, so representing the region well.
I'm feeling left out. Shout out to Bradford University.
And I've got the cufflinks on today as well.
Yeah, so I think, getting on topic, obviously you mentioned net zero and sustainability as part of your introduction there. We're really, as a nation now, we're a lot more focused on climate change and net zero. So, let's start with the fundamentals here. To the listeners, to the audience here, let's drill down. What is climate change?
To me first?
Yeah, to you, yes.
Sure. So I think it's important to be clear on the difference between the climate and the weather. Climate change is about the long-term changes in the global climate. So how things are changing in different parts of the world. So, in broad terms, in the UK, we expect wetter winters, warmer summers, right? In very broad terms. So it will shift, and we are starting to see that. What that means in terms of the weather, and we're experiencing this now, is more extremes of particular weather events because the climate is changing.
Yeah.
So whether that's more intense periods of rainfall, which are contributing to flooding, or in the summer, longer periods of drought, and one of the impacts of that, as we have seen, is more fires. In woodland and across the countryside.
Yeah. And again, while we're trying to prepare for flood mitigation, we also need to prepare for drought. To build on that, another key element of what we're doing as an industry to move forward here is climate adaptation. Would you like to elaborate on what climate adaptation is?
Shall I chip in a little bit?
Yeah, of course.
So two broad buckets then. One is mitigation, which is about bluntly reducing greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. So, trying to reduce man's impact. But adaptation then is because of whether the climate is already changing and because of the amount of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere and the impact that has, the phrase people are using is we've got an amount of climate change baked in. It's going to happen anyway, even if we stopped greenhouse gas emissions tomorrow, kind of thing. There is still the climate is still changing. So adaptation is about how do we need to change many parts of our lives and our infrastructure to be able to respond to short-term sort of shocks, like a major storm or wildfire or whatever it might be, but also then to have the ability to have resilience and sort of bounce back. Over the longer term. So it's making us more resilient, to what is inevitably going to happen and is happening.
Getting better at living with these changes that are already happening.
Yes, completely.
You, Andy, have kind of, based on your kind of introduction, it's very diverse but also wide view of climate change research, climate change intelligence, I would say, today. So I'm just going to focus here for a little bit. So you've just kind of explained the context of climate adaptation. Yep. I think the other one we hear a lot is net zero. So explain to us.
Yeah, so back to the first bucket then, mitigation. So net zero is not about eliminating our emissions globally, so that's carbon and other greenhouse gases. It's unlikely we will get to the point of stopping emissions totally, but it's about getting to a position where we are not emitting any more, or let me put it another way, the net effect. So the emissions we are emitting, we are also removing from the same time. So the net effect is no more carbon and other greenhouse gases being emitted into the atmosphere. Yeah. And actually, it's recognised now that not only do we need to get to net zero, but we also need to remove carbon emissions from the atmosphere, and we'll need to do that for decades
But is that
decades
where
ahead.
things like afforestation and,
Yes.
reintroducing new habitats into our current environment?
Yes.
That's where it brings added value, because it helps to remove,
completely.
to capture some of that carbon
Yes,
and remove
exactly
it from the
that.
environment.
Yes, which we can talk about if that's useful a bit.
Yeah.
But there are different ways of doing it,
Yeah.
and the natural, what's called natural enhanced methods are a massively important part of that.
Yeah.
Carl and I have talked to a number of our guests around the value of nature-based solutions, and we come at it usually predominantly from flood management. It's a flood management solution.
Sure.
And I guess one of the things we want to explore further is the multifunctionality of working in that space. So it's not just removing or managing or controlling or slowing the flows, which is a primary flood management.
Yeah, creating a climate resilient city, as it was.
Yes.
I mean, we could put stormwater planters or SUDS features in a city centre, and that could reduce the amount of surface water, entering that sewer system. It can hold it back. But also as well, a well-planted and green urban area can cool, and it can create carbon sequestration.
Completely.
And there are many wider benefits that we can't necessarily quantify against that traditional grey engineered flood resilience scheme of storing X cubic meters of water as well.
And I think obviously, Kate, with the Institution of Civil Engineers, the challenge of the future means that we need more innovative ideas and more innovative processes, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we've got to start to do is look at the whole picture and stop addressing the challenges where they manifest, but more think about, especially in terms of flooding, that catchment to coast. What is going on? Where is the rain falling? What do we do within that space where it's falling in order to reduce it? And that in itself then supports those environments as well. So, if we are slowing down the amount of water that's coming off the peatlands, we'll get less erosion of the peatlands. And they are absolutely vital for holding that carbon. If we release that carbon, then we're getting into really difficult places. So, yeah, in terms of that and looking at the bigger picture, thinking about what can we do to slow the water down and give it time to actually, soak into the ground, hopefully, and maintain those environments, that biodiversity, because that's the next big challenge that we've got coming on. If we keep building everything without taking into consideration the environment, then we're not gonna see the same creatures. We're already losing insects at a ridiculous rate. We've got to. It's the big picture thinking, isn't it? It's that whole systems approach and understanding how one thing interacts with something else further down the line.
But do you also think that's a case of how we look at the different sectors, if that makes sense? So we talk about the built environment, and Carl and I have discussed things like how design landscapes and the landscape architecture, the different skills who are really good in their own spaces, and whether we need to get better at linking up these sectors. Like, shouldn't we be connecting leveling up and the current water and environment challenge? We still have separate policies, and it's how can we as an industry pull those conversations into the same space?
Yeah, I mean, we hear examples where people are trying to understand whose floodwater is whose, so that we know who can get which funding to help pay for a particular part of the project. And then one organisation might get the funding towards that project, but another organisation doesn't, so the whole thing can't happen. And it's adding more complications to something. And if we can collaborate better and get the policies and the funding to work better, we've got much more chance.
And I think as a region, through the Northumberland Integrated Drainage Partnership, we've got a mechanism to collaboratively work. But let's look at other sort of examples of climate resilient cities and working together. So one example I'm going to pull out here and put on Andy on the spot is Mansfield. And in Mansfield, that's somewhere that we've got. I think it's Severn Trent Water in that particular area dealing with Nottinghamshire County Council highways, and they're dealing with water and flood management, where that would sometimes be something that would be led by a lead local flood authority, but in this instance they're looking at a different approach, and they've got funding through Ofwat, and they're doing a climate resilient town, because it's not a city obviously, but then right next to that you've got Sheffield with Greater Green. as well. And you know, there's a lot of examples up and coming within the UK now. Before that, would have to look at places like Rotterdam and Malmo. You know, Andy, how is consultancy? Are you taking these forward?
I think in two ways. Firstly, because I think we are seeing more of our clients who recognise the need for these more systems-based approaches, and that's either because the clients themselves understand the need, or in some cases, and I've seen a massive shift in doing sustainability consultancy 20 years ago when we were still advocating for it. But the laws weren't, and the policies and requirements weren't as strong. Whereas now the gap between what you would like to do and what you have to do is reduced massively. So, and that has to be a good thing. So in many respects, I think clients are demanding it. It's in the brief, for whatever reason, because policy and local strategy is driving them that way, or the building regulations or whatever it might be is driving them, or they are, dare I say, but an enlightened client, educated client that gets the need for those things, or their business and their brand and their stakeholders, are driving them in that way. So there's something about the clients and the briefs are just better for us. But secondly, if they're not, then certainly for us as ARUP, because of our sort of global mission, I would say we would always seek to explain the reasons for how why and how things might be done better. And you were saying about everybody's talking about multiple benefits. Once you start having a conversation around what those multiple benefits might be, you can see clients think, I hadn't quite thought about it in that way.
Yeah.
And so we are at times able to influence the brief at a fairly early stage. So
you're right. When consultants like ARUPs and there are other global consultants out there, you do have a bit of a kind of international visibility. So you can see what's happening in different parts of the world. And it might not be exactly the same, but you can identify transferable skills.
Completely.
So that in itself brings some diversity into the kind of design rooms when we're trying to tackle some of these challenges while minding the purse strings, because let there be no doubt, there's always a budget, and that usually is one of the biggest challenges, isn't it, making some of these solutions affordable.
Yes. I think that is a massively important area and is something that is only going to grow. And you're right, I am fortunate being in ARUP, and the current role I have working with my colleagues in places like Durban in South Africa and elsewhere. Many of these cities and parts of the world have had to be resilient, their whole time, because they don't have the benefits even that we have in the UK. So there are techniques and knowledge transfers, to be done. It's not just about the UK knows best. Absolutely not. There is so much learning in other parts of the world. Yeah, and we're fortunate to be able to, link up very efficiently with our colleagues and understand those lessons and bring, stuff from the UK to them, and vice versa, which is super helpful.
And I think what you were saying there about the desire of the client to be more climate aware. I think as local authorities, signing up to, climate change emergencies and having net zero policies in place. That's another mechanism that helps us do that. And I think Kate, obviously, similar to myself, you've had multidisciplinary experience, and how do you see these flood and water management correlating with transport, for example? What are the opportunities there if we got around the table and talk to each other a bit more?
Absolutely, and it's getting that full picture, isn't it, and understanding how what you do impacts another organisation or something else. So the highways may want to remove the water as quickly as possible from the road surface for safety reasons.
Yeah,
absolutely. But is that going to have an impact further down the line? And what is that impact going to be? Is it actually going to be more detrimental? So it's always a challenge. But the more that you can get people to talk and and stop just looking at this is our problem and look at it with that broader perspective. But it's also about looking further down the line as well, isn't it? It's not just about the here and now and what we can address here and now. It's sort of like whole life. Where are we going in the future? We are going to have more rainfall. We're going to have, those intense periods of rain, which, we have been seeing more and more frequently.
Yeah.
And so it's no longer a once in 100 years challenge for a huge rainfall. That might now be 1 in 20. It might be 1 in 10. We don't know. And the longer it takes us to address some of these challenges, the likely it is that it's going to become more and more. So that whole life, making sure that we're talking with each other, making sure that people understand why we're doing things as well is absolutely vital. So whether that is the public, whether that's the contractors, whether it's the clients as well, because the clients don't always come from an enlightened viewpoint, especially if they're not regularly building new projects. They need to have that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you've mentioned the public there, a lot of the solutions we need to install are in the public domain. They are in adopted highway or public open space. And, sometimes I think that the value of these features need to be celebrated. But also as well, you take a high street or, a city centre where you've got flooding as an issue and you want to put in, greater green infrastructure, say for like Sheffield, for example. There is still a demand for, pedestrian cyclist movements. There's loading, unloading for shops, and there's a pavement cafe culture came since COVID, and it's understanding flood management's place in that wider urban planning, urban design, and placemaking.
Stepping back and looking at the bigger picture. Years ago, I was working in a flood alleviation scheme, and there was this reinforced concrete road, and it weathered, and it had a certain look, and it was such a sticking point for the residents when the contractor came back and put exactly a brand new, same concrete spec, but obviously it was a brand new reinforced concrete road, so it was still really whitish because wear and tear hadn't happened. And actually, if someone had said, well, let's make this road, it's still a road, but let's make it a permeable surface, they would have been hell on. There was hell on because the road didn't look exactly like the old one did. And we said, you do know there's such a thing as wear and tear, so it will eventually look like that. But it's just those opportunities that we have all these engineering standards for the right reasons. They're for quality and safety and all the reasons why we have these standards. But in the context of adapting or modifying or expanding the standards to be multifunctional, there is still a bit of friction there. You have to go to a lot of effort to swap a traditional solution, same function, for a more, say, climate change solution. So something that has a functionality of perhaps allowing for infiltration or other functions which benefit other things other than its primary function. So we talk about, yes, we need to be more holistic, but if you look at if you drill down to the system, something as fundamental as putting a road, if I said to you, Carl, if you wanted to put an adoptable road and you made the surface porous, what are the challenges to get that road adopted? Yeah,
there's challenges. And again, as the UK, the challenges you have in, say, Scotland are totally different to what you'd have in England, and it's authority by authority, because each highway authority that adopts that road has different standards. And ultimately it's risk based. It's understanding the maintenance required and that long term management of it. And I think there are examples where you look at where gullies have been replaced by stormwater planters, for example, and they just take one cut per year. And I don't know how many times I'm going to go back to referring to it, but Sheffield. I was taking
Sheffield's popular.
Yeah. I mean, when we visited Sheffield in February, and it had all Greater Green had just been cut back, and you could it was great because you could see all that infrastructure. You could see that the water flowed into the stormwater planter, and then 3 inches above the base or the planting bed of that, you had a gully So when that water filled to a certain height, it would naturally go into the gully like it was on a traditional highway network. But all of the silt and things that would normally go into that gully are now getting captured within that planting bed. So basically, you'd need that one cut a year, and then the gully sucker would come and clean that gully out at the same time. Now, I've seen I watched drum and bass on a bike on YouTube, and it was set in Sheffield, and that was probably late summer, I'd say. But they cycled through the Greater Green area. It's at about 1 hour 12 minutes if anyone wants to reference it. But basically, you see it in full bloom. You see the difference that makes, and how that landscape of that particular part of the city. And I did my undergrad in Sheffield, and the places that the Greater Green's been implemented are not places you would have visited 20 odd years ago. And it's really opened up a new element of a city, where even when we went in February, people were sitting there having their lunches in pocket parks that were a bypass, and this is reducing the risk of flooding. It's doing everything. You've got cyclists going along there, people having their lunch. It's reducing flooding. It's a lovely place to walk, and I think that's kind of that's what we all need to be doing as a society, just considering everything and the value that has to a city or an urban environment.
Well, it's about those health benefits. It's the active travel. You're getting people out of cars, hopefully, so that they feel like it is somewhere that they can cycle safely. People are happier and healthier around greenery. It's just a fact. And that in itself, if we can invest in these things and make people healthier, then that saves costs elsewhere with the health service. It really is a no-brainer, isn't it? It's like, what can we do to make the places that people live in beautiful, so they want to spend time outside, so they feel like they can spend time outside, they can meet other people, which is going to help people's mental health. It gets them out, gets them exercise. So many benefits, so many benefits.
I know, but we've heard about biodiversity net gain, which is on the horizon, I understand. And I guess the point I'm getting at is we essentially create a new act or a new legislation that just looks at one thing, while all these other systems are in place. So it limits how far you can go, right? So we all agree that if all these systems were integrated, that would be much better. We can get there faster. We can get more value out of the whole process of adapting how we live to a climate change future. But then we also have guidance and standards, and in all the different sectors, in all the little silos, which are basically saying, well, you can't really adopt that if it's got this. You can't really, and all those standard specifications are based on traditional ways of working, i.e. traditionally very energy intensive, which is the very opposite of what we're trying to do. Materials, our love affair with concrete is so well ingrained in pretty much most of construction.
Trying to work with clients so that they know what they want out of their projects at the outset before, they know they need a new building, say, why do you want it? Have you got one already that could be, refurbished, retrofitted, so that, you're avoiding getting rid of the current embodied carbon that's within that building? And what can we do to think about things better? What do you really want about it? You say you want it to be, energy efficient building. What does that mean to you? And how much do you want that? Are you going to get to the point where the costs going up slightly, and then that's one of the first things to drop away? So the value toolkit has been introduced by the government in terms of trying to make sure that clients agree what they want in advance, what are their values, and then they can be reminded of that time upon time. So when they start veering away from something, then it's all like, but this is one of your key values that you want to do. It might be biodiversity, it might be low carbon, it might, often might be the community benefits. And it's always bringing them back to that, so that we're not losing what should be a really valuable product in terms of a building because of the capital expenditure, that initial cost of the build. We can look further down the line and say, right, but in 20 years' time, you want this building to still be functional and not at the point where it needs to be knocked down and rebuilt, you know? So that those kind of challenges, and they are huge challenges, but we're starting to introduce those mechanisms where it is possible, and there's practiced ways that it can work, it could happen, and we need to try and promote those. And that's part of getting the industry to work together more effectively and talk to the clients, the end users, the members of the public. Again, we're all about making the UK a better place to live for everybody that's here now, and also potentially those that are going to come and live here, because if we don't address climate change, then we are going to have a huge change in population across the world.
And I think it's about understanding the asset and giving residents, people, the communities, an understanding on the value of that asset. So one example I'm gonna give here is a major high street store. Firstly, one has a green wall that you can see walking up Northumberland Street in Newcastle, and that's a very visible element of climate adaptation. But also as well, if you go to the toilet and on the toilet wall it says, look, water used to flush the toilet is being stored from our rainfall. And I think that's kind of celebrating that use of grey water, and big businesses, that's great. But when we have everyday people, if they see that in department stores, etc., what can we encourage as a sector? What can we encourage residents to do to their own homes? How can we help make that change?
Shall I dive in?
Go on then.
I think that from a water perspective, I think there's a lot that can be done here. I think generally, people are now looking for ways that they can help. I mean, I'm making a huge generalization, right? But I think people are generally looking for, how can I make a difference in what I do and contribute. So my sense is that there is a willingness from people to be doing something. And then there's from my sort of experience in housing design, there are still, I'm going to go back to the buckets, but there's a bucket of stuff that works really well and is simple, and then there's some stuff that we still haven't quite worked out yet. Yeah. So just going to the stuff that works well, there are some really obvious things like water butts, to recycle water. There are things you can do in the home about not keeping the tap running when you're cleaning your teeth. Really simple stuff that don't. I mean, yes, buying a water butt, but other things that are more about how people in their homes are using water without necessarily changing things. After that, we're then into, if you're changing the bathroom or the kitchen, think about the showers and the taps. The technology in this stuff has moved on so far now, and to reduce the amount of water needed to flush a loo, you can still have a really good experience in a shower with a shower with a lot lower flow rate. All of those things are in place. Yeah. Go on.
Yeah. Do you think
I feel a yes, but
no. Do you think a lot of this lies with developers and developers making a change into how we build homes?
Yes, that's going to take me into the second bucket.
Right.
So of the stuff that where things are still difficult. So I think in house building and the sort of standards that are changing, there is every need for water to be a key component of that. I'm also going to go back because I can't remember when it was introduced. In the 2000s, there was a code for sustainable homes that was introduced that was setting out standards for new homes, and had a requirement that from 2016 homes would be net zero. Now, I did quite a lot of work in that time on housing, and this is where the hard stuff we really got into, because there was, to get to the highest level home, the requirement was to show that you could reduce the amount of water, potable water, that a per person would use down to something like 90 litres per person per day. And don't quote me, I think the current sort of average is upwards of 200, I'm going to say. So it's quite a big target. And that was, to get anywhere near that, we had low flush loo, so using a lot less water to flush the loo. Showers and taps were all low flow. We kind of threw everything at it. And also we had rainwater recycling and then reusing that water in various ways in the house, including to flush the loos and also for the first rinse in the washing machine, because as long as your clothes come out at the end and they're clean with potable water, clean water, that's all fine. But that first rinse, because your clothes are already dirty, that's okay. You can use grey water. Could we find washing machines, that could take clean and grey water or non-potable water? There was maybe one or two. So there's the kit that we need to actually do the things that we know that we can do, if that makes sense.
We have an idea of what it could take. So I think the kind of fittings in your rooms, you can go into any DIY or soap type shop. You can get low flow taps and and those are commercial products that people are obviously buying. And I guess the point I kind of struggle with is why we can't translate that need for innovation in how we live in our homes. How can that why that's not translated into buying power? Because I think if more people were looking for homes that came with this feature, grey water systems are not new. There are countries across the world that have grey water systems as a norm, and this is why I talk about learning from other countries. And yet, although we know water is scarce, I know we've got water security in the sense of our supplies are fairly one of the best in the world, but there are parts of England that we have drought issues, seasonal, repeated drought every year. It's an issue, it makes the news. And we happen to be in a lovely area because of Kildare that we haven't had to yet, but doesn't mean that we won't get there. Yeah. And yet we use water, good quality, drinking water quality for everything.
Yeah, and that water, just to add to that water goes through a treatment process. You then use it. You then use it or don't use it, just leave the tap on. Then that has to go through another treatment process before it can go back into that natural water. Yes. So we are treating it twice and sometimes not using it.
Yes. Whereas water scarce countries will use what we as we say what we call grey water, so untreated water that's been used in taps and showers, etc. They will use that to irrigate public parks and planting without a second thought, and they do that in a safe way so it doesn't create a health hazard, etc.
They will use it for everything except drinking and eating. I think I obviously grew up in West Africa in Cameroon, and when I look at it, it feels like there's a part of me who's part of this, because I'm also somebody who's grown up here. So part of me is I'm part of the system. I will sometimes just get up and turn the tap on and not think about it. And then there's part of me that's grown up, and I still visit a place where we have systems, but the infrastructure is not as developed as the one we're used to here. So that part of me in the homes that I visit, when it rains, the massive drums, like you don't have to tell anyone to like people just have drums outside. And as it's raining, the drums fill. And if that one fills up and there's more rain, you find buckets and you collect the water. Like it's just ingrained as you're wasting water. And yes, it's not treated. It's rainwater. That water be used to water plants. It'll be used to clean the house. It'll be used to do your laundry. It'll be used for everything. And in some cases where there's no infrastructure, they will collect that water and boil it and then use it for eating and drinking. And it feels like there is a kind of cross-learning here. And
back to my point, sorry, I'm interrupting, but my point earlier about knowledge transfer of really, out of necessity, people are doing things in different parts of the world that we could really learn from.
So
interrupted you, sorry.
It's all right. So to reflect back on that, going back again to my transport engineering days, I was involved in a site where it was in an area not attractive to developers. But what happened was this development came forward and it had something called a home zoning. I don't know if you're aware of the concept of home zones, but basically it changes the priority of the highway. It's been designed completely different. Yes. It's got social areas where people can come out and congregate. Cyclists and pedestrians have priority over vehicles, etc. And what we found was when this development came forward, people buying into, there was the deeds of a property had different conditions, etc. People really bought into that idea and that concept. Could we do that for a climate resilient community? And if so, what would that look like, Kate?
I think it's not that people don't want to do this stuff.
Yeah.
I think the majority of people accept that this is something that it's not just a desirable thing, it's a thing that you have to do. Uh-huh. And whether that's, thinking about the energy that you're using or the water that you're using, people want to do it. But it's not always made as easy as it could be. There's too much conflicting information, especially if you think about, the energy sources for your home, which is right. There's a lot of negativity. I've got an air source heat pump and we've had that for 15 years at our house and it's been great. There are no issues with it whatsoever. We've never had any issues with it. And yet I still hear on the news, on the radio, it's like, oh, well, they just don't do it and this doesn't work and that doesn't. But we need ways to communicate with the public about how effective things are, and we need people to build it into the properties.
Absolutely,
retrofitting homes costs a lot of money.
Yeah,
but if people are building new homes, why is it all not being built in right now? I mean, it's the sustainable homes, it should be there. It should have been happening for years.
And I feel we're at a point in society now where there is demand for these types of homes. And I'd really love it. We get a lot of planning applications as local authorities through it. I'd really love it if we had a developer, and this is a challenge to any developers list. I'd love it if you came,
come with us with a torch.
We have a sustainable community here. We have solar panels, we have green roofs, we have grey water. We have great, sustainable transport links throughout the development. We have social play spaces, etc. We're just not getting that coming forward.
Yeah, and I think people are willing to pay for it now as well. Yeah. So we've had people who, and I've got friends who've been selling a house which they retrofitted, and people have come to find out about the retrofit. They've come to view the property, and the reason why they've particularly picked that property is because it's been retrofitted and they want to know. And different people have got different reasons for doing it. Sometimes it is that green agenda and it's going to be cutting their carbon. Other people see it as a cost, saving.
Absolutely, it reduces. If it's done right, it reduces the homeowner's bills. And we're in a cost of living crisis here.
Absolutely.
And energy prices, they're probably only going to go one way longer term.
Absolutely.
Ultimately,
absolutely. So, there is a desire for people, but if what they have put available to them at the cost that they have is not up to that standard and not delivering that, then they're going to have to go down the other route. And yet then if, 5 years down the line they want to do that retrofit, it's going to cost significantly more than actually just doing it in the first place. And not either inflating the price for that particular property because it can be sold as a green property, or, just making sure that, their own social conscience is meaning that what they are creating is a good product, which is fit for the future.
So what's happened? We have just we're just so invested in this, and I'm like, oh my God, we're going to run out of time. So before we bring things to a close, the question is, something disruptive, Kate, something disruptive to completely transform this space, to give us a chance in the future. What would that be?
I think it's, for me, and looking at the home side of things and making sure that people who maybe don't have that knowledge, my husband's an architect, so, he was really keen to put that in, but not everybody is coming from that viewpoint. So making it's introducing that sustainable homes, making sure that all those homes that are going to be built on are not 5 years down the line, not 10 years down the line, but, starting as soon as possible, say that, every home that is being done needs to be, fit for the future, and thinking about things like, the tax on updating a property, paying on an existing property, doesn't make sense. Paying VAT on changing a property doesn't make sense if you don't have to pay that for a new property. So some of those issues for me.
Andy?
Same to me. It's a really good question. The scale of the challenges we face are so vast, not just in this country, but globally, and the need for changes in people's lifestyles related to energy, water, how we travel, health, all of those things are so massive. And I'm a great believer in a few small things done by millions of people could make a huge difference. So, and we've spoken a bit here about public and differences between people who kind of work in this area and kind of know the stuff and know what to do, and a broad range of people who aren't necessarily working in that sector but possibly still want to do the right thing, or are not necessarily aware. Digital technology, our phones, the access to people, through games and all sorts of things, giving people, more useful information that they can choose, to use or not. Yeah. But just getting millions of people to do a few things differently, I think could make a huge difference.
It's sort of, obviously both Meshi and I have both got young kids, and things like a Fatberg on Go Jetters, which is a CBeebies TV show, that's helping raise awareness of what it is, and maybe we can start seeing water butts or green roofs on kind of, I don't know, Katie Morag or something. Like that.
Because our children are saying, Mum, Dad, why aren't we doing X?
And as well, I've mentored apprenticeships for far too long to mention now, but as well, I do a lot of sort of climate change summits with schools and things like that, and kids care more than ever, and they're really passionate,
and they're curious. They're very curious,
and they're challenging as well. They challenge our why don't you do that? Well, because
why can't we?
Because the rule says why.
And I think that's kind of something, we as a generation have a social responsibility, and I feel like the people working in civil engineering now, we're in that transition stage of that traditional build up with concrete to what about the future, what about the environment, and where this handover generation where we really need to push these changes. We've got a lot of responsibility in that element.
Absolutely. We're seeing more and more kind of reverse mentoring as well within the industry, where those younger generations coming through are challenging those business leaders and saying, actually, no, that's not the way that we need to do it. We need to look at this. Enough. And this is why, because it's going to bring financial benefits to our business. So it's making sure that all those voices are heard, that back to that diversity, making sure that we are bringing in as many people with as many different ideas, because that's where the innovation comes from. That's where the change is going to happen. And that's what's going to, make this country, the UK, a much better place to live for everybody.
On that note, thank you both for your time today. It's been a brilliant conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the PGN podcast today. We hope you found it informative and enjoyable. If you did, please like and subscribe to the podcast. But also, please, if you find this useful to anyone else, pass it on and spread the word.
To find out more about Project Groundwater Northumbria, please visit www.pgn.org.uk.